All right, welcome back. So today we're going to take a look at GitHub Copilot, which is an AI-based developer tool that you can plug into IDEs such as IntelliJ, etc., and it will help you with your code, write documents, refactor code. And actually, I wasn't planning to make this video, and this isn't like a comprehensive review of Copilot, but yesterday I was working on a personal project and I decided to try there's a 30-day free trial. I decided to give it a shot. And I've been using it for a week or so, a little bit, and I did it for to help write comments and other things. And then I started to notice it was giving some very helpful comments and suggestions of how I could improve the code, or it would figure out the next line I needed to write, where you need to have a fair amount of context to get it right. I was like, hey, this thing's really cool. And yesterday I was playing around with it some more, and it was, in my view, doing some pretty impressive stuff. So I thought I would just throw together a video and show you kind of what Copilot did within the context of a project that I have been working on, just as a jumping off point, a quick kind of look into some of its capabilities. And this is one of those tools where I think these are definitely worth exploring and developing a point of view on, because I think they will get used quite a bit, and I think people will have different reactions, and I think the state of the art is continuing to evolve quite a bit. But I think what I'll do is let me at least just walk through, well, let me back up. First of all, I have the website for Copilot right here. I think it's $10 a month for personal use, or more expensive for enterprise uses with more features. Kind of recording, you can get a 30-day free trial. So that's what I did. It's worth it. Just remember to cancel your subscription so you don't start that by accident. But let me at least walk you through the project I have and just show you some of the places where I was using Copilot, and just talk through what I was able to do with it. So the projects I've been working on, actually I'm going to do another video on this complete project and put the code up on GitHub, but it's a file organizer. And so what it does is it'll both deduplicate files by calculating, I'll back up even more. It's a file organizer really aimed at media files that you would store on a NAS. So you'll, like most people, I have tons of photos and videos that have been accumulated across multiple devices over the years. I have duplicates because I've stored them in every cloud service on earth. And I wanted to first deduplicate them and then put them into a consistent organized file structure. And I decided I'm just going to write the code to do it myself. Only a couple classes, and what it does is it'll traverse a set of directory trees, calculate the MD5 checksums of every file, and then copy all the unique files to a new location. And then it has an organized capability, which will reorganize the files, again copying them to a new location, and organize them into a file structure that looks roughly like a year-month-date format. So that's all it does, and I've been playing around with this on the side. So yesterday I was kind of bored and just wrapping up the code a little bit, and what I wanted to do was, let me just jump to the main function. Well, you can kind of see some of it here. You can see I just comment things out and I just mess around with the capabilities I want to test. And I was like, you know what, I really need to write a command line parsing function. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, I don't need to do this. Let me see if this GitHub Copilot tool can actually do the job. And so let me show you what you can do is, it is a plugin to IntelliJ. And by the way, it works just as you're writing code, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But if you just want to open up a chat window, you can go to Tools, GitHub Copilot, and open up the chat. So this will get you a new window. I'll just delete the current conversation so we can start over. But here's what I want it to do. My program takes 3 arguments. It takes an action of what you want it to perform. Do you either want to deduplicate files or organize them? It takes a list of input directories and a single output directory. So I'm going to ask GitHub Copilot to write that for us. So let's see. So I'm going to say write a function to parse command line arguments. Actually, I'm going to say write a static function. There are 3 arguments. The first is an action that can either be deduplicate files or organize files. The second argument is an input directory, and it can be specified many times. The third argument is an output directory. Now I'm also going to ask it to write a help function. So you can, actually, I should say there are 4 arguments. Actually, no, I'm not going to say 4 arguments. Prompt engineering. By the way, I don't know what this is going to do because I can't remember what I typed in last night and I didn't save it, so we're going to find out. So the first argument, the second, and third, and I'm not going to say 4th argument, I'm going to say also write, also take an argument which prints out help statements about how to use the program. Okay, let's see what this does. Okay, on the surface of it, that's pretty cool. So let's read what it did. It said, here's a static function to parse command line arguments. The function uses a map to store the command line arguments and their values. -A is used to specify the action, which can be either deduplicate or organize, which is what we said. The -I option is used to specify the input directories and can be used multiple times. The -O option is used to specify the output directory. The -H option is used to print help. Okay, that's pretty cool. So let's take a look at the code. So it is static. It returns a map with a list of strings. And so it iterates over the arguments, basically as a switch statement. Let me expand this a little more. I don't know if there's a way to zoom this. Okay, so if it's an action and it equals deduplicate organize, it puts the action into the arguments. And then for the input directory, so there you go, it recognized we can have many input directories. And so it makes those a list, output directory, okay. And then it wrote an entire help function. So this is pretty cool. Like to me, like I think the help function piece is really neat because it's able to translate all of this back to an English readable string, and it correctly got the parameters, the action, the output directory, and then you can pass -I more than once. That's pretty cool. There's one thing I don't like about it. I wouldn't return a map like this. I think it might be more clear if it returned like a custom data structure. So let's see if we can ask it to clean that up. Let's say change the function to return, let's say a custom class instead of the map. Sure, we can do that. It loves it. So it modifies it to return an instance of command line arguments instead of the map. This makes sense. Where is command line arguments defined? The function now returns an instance of command line arguments. That's weird. It didn't show the constructor for command line arguments. I actually wonder if it, so I did this before, but I thought I deleted the chat. I wonder if it saves state. So let's see, what is the definition of command line arguments? Oh, well, there you go. Oh, I see what it did. Okay, so in my main class, I had something called command line arguments, and I think what it did is it recognized that and reused it. It's clever. But you can see it replaced the map with this, Very cool. I don't know, to me that's pretty neat. So let's try something else. Let's write a method to test it. My response got filtered. We're going to downvote that. Write a test method for parse args. Right, okay. Write a unit test for the parse args function. That is really weird. I wonder why that happened. Let's try this. Write a unit test. Okay. So it writes it using JUnit, which I didn't ask it to do. So let's see. So basically it sets up a bunch of parameters, sends it to process args and checks that the result, okay, that looks reasonable. So let's check, let's ask it to write more. Write 5 more test cases. Okay. These test cases cover various scenarios, including no arguments, one type of argument, and an invalid action. So this is interesting. So I said just write 5 more. I didn't say how to write them. I didn't say the variations to try, and it just came up with that on its own. So here's an invalid action. That's correct. I mean, that is an invalid action. Only the output directory argument. Oh, that's interesting. So I didn't even specify what arguments should be there, if it's okay to only have an output directory, and it's trying all these out. So this is neat. That will give you a starting point. And let me just jump back to my code. So I ran this last night, and I actually ended up, I think I used different prompts, but I did end up with similar output, which you can see here, and complete with the help function. So I thought this was pretty amazing. Again, I came into a cold. I was just playing around with this, ended up writing, who wants to write another command line argument processor, and this did it for me, and appears like it did it pretty well. Here's the thing I found interesting, and this is where I'd love to hear what you think. So one, I'm pretty sure that I could have written this function in about the same time it took me to figure out the right prompts. Maybe. Certainly if I was coding full-time, which I'm not doing anymore, I think it would have been about equal speed. But I found that in working with the Copilot chat, I was like much less engaged in the code itself. So I'd look at the code it put out, and I was like, yeah, that looks about right. But it was more like my head was much more in an editing state and kind of just quick review, rather than when you write it yourself, like you are thinking much more and figuring out every line. So I found the way I was thinking about the code in this particular example to be different. And maybe that's a takeaway. And you can imagine, think about how this changes your workflow as an engineer, and kind of how it changes, how it changes how you think about the problem, and are you like really rigorously thinking about it? I don't know. I think it's one of those things I just need to continue to use and be open to, changing kind of my viewpoint and my workflow. But so that was one example. Let's just jump back. I had a list of things that I want to look at. Okay, so we did the command line parameters. So let me jump into other pieces of my code. So here, this is the code I have, which basically iterates over a directory, calculates MD5 checksums, and more or less builds a hash map. So I tried to ask it some more general questions like, here, let's try this. Let's just make sure this all set up. I was curious if it could figure out how this program scales. And by the way, it scales like with memory by the size of the hash map. So it's not trying to do anything tricky. If you iterate over a large number of files, your hash map will scale by the number of unique files you have. So let's just ask it, how does this class scale? So this is interesting. So it says the checksum builder class as currently implemented has some considerations regarding scalability, memory usage. The class stores all checksums in memory and hash map. The number of unique files, different checksums, is very large. This could lead to high memory usage. Exactly what I said. File I/O, the class reads each file fully to compute its checksum. For large files or a large number of files, this could be slow and also lead to high disk I/O. Also correct. And by the way, in my case, I would probably run this and point at a network share. So, and I don't have I don't have 10 gig network to my NAS, so this would definitely be slow. CPU usage, the class computes the MD5 checksum for each file, which is CPU intensive. Yeah, we'll see. Fair enough. Concurrency, the class processes files sequentially if there are many files processed. I think this is a very reasonable analysis of the file. And I think the fact that it didn't produce some like generic output, like, yeah, it could use a lot of CPU, but it actually says why. In particular, it's saying an MD5 checksum can be computationally expensive, or your map can use a lot of usage because it scales with the number of files. That to me was impressive. Okay, so jumping to another thing I noticed with this, if you look at how I coded this, it's using kind of, I would say, standard Java ways of doing things. I'm not as familiar with some of the newer patterns in Java. So one thing I tried asking it was, basically, how can I rewrite this using Java 8 features? So let's try it. Okay. I love how it summarizes the changes. But let's just go back to what it said at the top. Class can be written using features such as streams and lambdas for more concise and readable code. Shows you how to do it, but then it summarizes. It says, in the calculate checksum method, I used for each from the stream API to iterate over directories. So it changed handle file into hex string. So let's take a look at these. So you can see the changes right here. Actually, I could probably bring up the original. So here they are side by side. Yeah, instead of iterating over directories with the for loop, it's using directories for each, and then it's using these streams. And you can see this down here. When I ran this on another class, I saw it using the optional class to avoid null pointer exceptions. But here's the other thing you can do. You can be like, you've seen kind of what it did, and you can be like, well, what is a stream? Or actually, what is the stream API? Great, so you can learn all about the stream API. The thing that I found interesting about this, and kind of going back to like changing a workflow, is, again, I'm coming into this maybe a little behind the times. I haven't read everything that's gone on with newer Java versions. Traditionally, the way I'd approach this is I grab a book, I'd read everything, understand what all the new features were, try them out. But you think about how this kind of changes that workflow. Now I can just ask Copilot, just like rewrite my code for me using these features. You can't just blindly accept it. But it allowed me to quickly see some of the new features in Java 8, see what code looked like with them, and then ask it for more information. So I found this to be a much quicker way to learn a set of features that I was not familiar with and see it in action with code I was familiar with. So I thought this was super cool. It can definitely be an accelerator to a development workflow. What else was there to play with? So you can ask it to write unit tests for these classes. It'll put entire unit test suites together. I think we saw that with the argument parsing method. You can ask if the code is thread safe. It'll answer that, and it'll basically tell you to add synchronize to every method. That's another thing I saw. So let's try one other thing, or two other things. Let's see if it can write some or generalize things a little bit. In this class, you can see my checksum code is hard-coded to use MD5. What if I want to make that configurable? So let's ask it to do that. How can I change this class to make the hashing algorithm configurable? So it says you can add a new instance variable to store the name of the hashing algorithm and set it in the constructor. reasonable. So here it is. Oh, okay. So it adds a variable to store the algorithm and then uses it there and it updates the constructor. This was interesting. So it said, so now you can specify a hashing algorithm as a string like MD5 or SHA-256. What I wonder is, my guess is it doesn't know if these are valid parameters to the message digest get instance method. We can look that up, but I won't. I'm guessing it kind of figured that out based on other kind of trainings of Stack Overflow or something. I don't know where it looked. That's just a guess. And it's certainly not validating the input. Oh, maybe we can try that. So so if you look in the constructor, all it did is just assign it. So let's say, so we'll ask it to write the validation code. We'll see what it comes up with. Okay, clever. So here's what it did. To validate the algorithm parameter, you can use the getAlgorithms method and it returns a set of all available algorithms. And you can check if the provided algorithm is in this set. You can throw an exception. That's actually better than I thought it was going to do. I thought it would check for like if the string was like null or empty or something. I think it may have already done that, but I thought it would add a very simplified, I didn't say how to validate it. If you look, I just said, just add code to validate it. I didn't say what to do, but it knew something, it had some context about what that was, and then was able to find a better validation method. So that is super cool. Now, was that faster? I don't think so. Like, I think if this was something you were doing every day, you whip that up with no problem. You could open up the Java doc and figure it out. But it's very interesting, and especially if you don't remember off the top of your head some of these parameters. Like, this is definitely an accelerator. So we asked it to refactor the code. It did that. Okay. Then we had to ask it to put in validation. Okay, fair enough. So let's look at. So here's my code which organizes the files by date. And like I said, I've kind of made up this date format of, well, you can see it right here in the regular expression. And it is year, 4 digits, month of 2 digits, day of 2 digits, and then a description. And so I want to organize, I'm going to look through all the files and I want to organize them into a directory structure that looks like that. So this is pretty much like my own business logic, right? People may have a different way to organize their files, a different approach. So let's see if we can get it to write new code to do that. So let's see how we could do that. I'm going to say write a new class similar to date organizer that organizes files. I'm going to say by the first 3 letters of the file name. I just made that up. It'll create some buckets. It's very enthusiastic. Sure, I can write that, no problem. Why don't you go get a coffee while I do the hard work? So let's see what it did. Yep, we'll create a new class called prefix organizer, clever, which implements the iFile organizer interface. This thing is going to pass an interview with proper abstraction. I love it. Don't know if I need it. The class will organize files based on the first 3 letters of the file name. Here's how you can do it. You did it for me. So let's see what it does. So it's interesting, it added the logger, it did that correctly. Takes the destination, the input directory. I'm not going to go through all this and thoroughly check it. I would probably ask it to write tests first and then figure it out. But it also copied how I did a lot of my logging statements. So it did use my code as basically a foundation for this. And it put like, here, I'll put these side by side. So organized files is really kind of the entry point into this. And then it kind of does a walk and uses this lambda to invoke handle file. So handle files were a lot of it. So here on the left is my version. And here is its created version. And you can see it basically copied it. Let's see where it does the prefixing. Oh, here we go. It's down to handle file name. Now I have a whole bunch of other functions here that I have different ways to handle files. I either I use a regular expression on the path, or I look at the modification date depending. And so what it does, it handles the file name, it grabs a prefix, and it creates a folder with the destination directory, separates it, and adds the prefix. I feel like it's going, so I think it will organize everything into one folder with the file's prefix. I would need to look at this a little more closely, but it's interesting. So let's do one more thing. Write a set of unit tests for this new class. So it's interesting, when I said this new class, of course, it understands the context and it knew what class to talk about. So it wrote a set of unit tests. I'm not going to verify these, but it's certainly a starting point. I keep saying I'm going to end this, so I'm going to do one more thing. So let's go back to my deduplicate files class, and let's just say review this code. So what it's doing is it's basically telling you what it does. So it talks about what each method does, okay, and roughly how it works. By the way, like I had it generate all the Java, the comments behind here. It does a pretty good job at that. The code is well structured and follows good practices. This is where like I thought it went off the rails. Like I think it's trying to make me feel good about myself. Here are the areas that could be improved. In create directories, the IO exception is caught but not handled or logged. Fair enough. Copy and deduplicate could potentially overwrite an existing file in the destination directory. That's interesting, because I don't think like the code analysis tools in IntelliJ would capture that. Copy and deduplicate could be refactored to improve readability and maintainability. The method is quite long. Yep. Okay, so it gave me some general suggestions. I'm just going to say refactor the code to make it better. Well, all right, sorry, apologies if there was a blip there, but my camera died right in the middle of that. But I had asked Copilot to rewrite this. Basically, I'm like, make the code better. Rewrite the whole thing. And basically it took all of its own suggestions right here and refactored it, basically doing what it said, handling exceptions. It cleaned up some of the code, handled the file overwrite. So I would need to put this in and test it, but pretty cool. So let me go back to my notes on the things I tried. So I think this is it. We went through kind of writing code, refactoring, writing tests. We asked it to generalize code, refactor. So that really, this is kind of like a summary of kind of my experiences from last night. And I just wanted to share all of that with you and to kind of give you my impressions of grabbing this tool and using it on a small code base I was working with. And like I said at the beginning, I think this is something we're trying and developing a viewpoint on, because these tools are very new and they're going to continue to evolve. I would say as you try them, try to observe like how your workflow changes. How does your thought process change? And I'm not saying if it's good or bad, but it's different and it feels different to use this tool. Like when you read about kind of large language models and prompt engineering and learning how to ask it questions to get the response you need, there's definitely a piece of that. And you could see just in my kind of little examples here, I'm trying to get it to do the right thing and hint it in the right directions, and that takes time. And so I'd say at this point, like, can I write code faster without it? In some cases, yes. I don't know. I think my takeaway, I'm going to keep using it for sure, because I want to see kind of what this technology can do and what the boundaries are. I'm amazed at some of the higher level analysis it can do when it can look in a class and talk about how it scales and why. I'm going to try to apply it to some bigger problems, but I think the word Copilot is a fair term. Like, I see this as almost like a partner I would use to help review my code, give me pointers, point out things I didn't catch before, like overwriting a file. I think I handled an exception for a file already exists, but there were some edge cases I missed. These things may have been caught in a traditional code review, and if I could use this tool to catch them faster, well, guess what? My productivity just went up, and I saved the time of one of the other engineers on my team. Really interesting technology, worth checking out. Am I going to spend $10 a month on this for personal projects? Right now, I probably wouldn't, but maybe in the long run, I don't know if I would, but just for tinkering around, maybe. It'll be interesting to try this with some languages I'm less familiar with, like doing some work in Python. Or I'd be curious to go back and I'm very familiar with C, C++, but see how it works in some of those environments as well. Anyway, that was kind of my quick rambling on GitHub Copilot for the day. Love to know what you think. If you've tried it, throw your comments down below. Or if you have, maybe you've used another tool, like I think AWS Code Whisperer or similar. I'd love to hear what you think about these tools and what you think they do well and they don't. And we'll see you next time.